Lieutenant Glenda Ritz, and we're going to proceed with calling the meeting to order. If I could have roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Present.
Mr. Elder?
Present.
Dr. Freitas?
Present.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Present.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Present.
Dr. Oliver?
Present.
Mr. Walker?
Present.
Mr. Watts?
Present.
Mrs. Wicker?
Present.
Superintendent Ritz?
Present. Thank you. If we would all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I wish to add an action item to move the Core Link administration to the fall, and I need 3 board members to approve adding this action item to the agenda. Do I have 3 members?
Yes.
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 Okay, so added. I also, in doing that, I would like to move discussion item H, which is on transition to college and career ready assessments, to have that discussion prior to the action. Are there any other?
You mean after the consent agenda?
When we get down to the action items, the new business, I will, before we take action on the proposal to move Core Link administration to fall, we will have discussion letter H. It's going to be hard for me in this configuration to see you raise your hand to go through the chair, so I'll try and go slow so that I can see you. So thank you for being patient with that. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Hearing none, all of those in favor of approving the agenda signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. Next is the approval of the minutes. You have the March 12 minutes submitted to you. Do I have a motion for approval?
So moved.
Is there any discussion?
I have an item to adjust.
Okay.
At the bottom of page 12, referring to the motion I had made at our last meeting, it states, she moved the plan be presented at a later meeting once the standards are in place, and I would appreciate it if we could put the specific date in there just to ensure that we're all on the same page there. So we had said late spring, early summer, and I would appreciate if the minutes could reflect that as well.
Okay. Any other discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of approval of minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed signify by saying nay. Approval.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
just point of clarification on Sarah's point. What was that date? I just want to make sure that we had that specific for the minutes because I was jotting it down and I didn't
Sure.
get it.
The department had asked for a little latitude in order to make sure that once the standards were in place, they had time to analyze. So my understanding was that that would happen at our May meeting or our June meeting, and I'm waiting for confirmation from the department on exactly when that will be.
And that is correct. We have the statement from the chair is the next on the agenda. I have a few things to report to you. First of all, we have released the initial data regarding iRead 3 to the schools in our INORS, Indiana Online Reporting System. We have not, and we will then be proceeding to finalize that data and get it into Compass later, and we'll do an official release later on. Also, the 4-star schools will be ready for release on Monday, and the graduation rate for 2013 will be ready for release on Tuesday, coming up next week. So I just wanted to let you know that those things were happening. Gordon and Andrea on the board, we will meet before October 28th meeting regarding the board procedures. So I want to let you know, I haven't forgotten about that. We've been very busy with some standards and breaks and people being out. So just wanted to make sure that you know that's on the radar. And the assessment subcommittee today that will happen following this meeting, we'll have a break between the two meetings, but we'll be exploring our assessment philosophy, the current assessment system, what are the current assessments and all the parameters of them, the future assessments that we need to be considering as the assessment system, preparing the RFP and what does that involve and the information gathering that needs to occur, the timeline for actual procurement, and future subcommittee meeting dates. So we have a robust agenda that will happen this afternoon. Are there any board member comments or reports at this time? Yes, Brad?
Just wanted to express a thank you. I had a chance to visit the CCR panels that we're working on, the articulation of standards, and just how proud I was to see hardworking teachers, subject matter experts, business leaders working through that process. It was intensive, and I know they're not done, but it was an honor.
And I will say that I've attended some sessions as well, so I appreciate the work that's going on too. Any other comments? Yes.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to say that Calumet High School up in my area, New Tech High now, is entering their 4th year after having adopted the New Tech model. It's my understanding that they may be the actual first school in the country to use New Tech as a turnaround model. And I think we have a real good example in our midst with New Tech and really many other New Tech schools in the state of Indiana as to possible alternative turnaround models for schools to think about. And I'm just hoping, I've had some discussions with one of their board members, I'm hoping they're able to collect some data from their senior class this year about what their experience has been. This is the first class that went through all 4 years of high school there under New Tech. And as many of you all probably already know, they have now converted their middle school to New Tech, and next year they're converting their elementary school to be completely New Tech. And I think it's showing a lot of promise in a demographic area that is very similar to some of the surrounding areas, and they're having success with that model, and I think that's going to be a beacon of hope for the future for that area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to make a brief comment. As an IPS parent, I'd just like to congratulate the Arsenal Tech basketball team on their state championship. Kudos, and they've got a Mr. Basketball as well. And on a similar note, I'd like to offer my condolences to board member BJ Watts on the failure of the state that shall not be named to our south on their performance Monday night. But anyways, I'm just kidding there.
Okay, any other comments?
I thought that last part of your comment was unnecessary. And I'm going to express my sympathy for BJ and tell him that I stand with you, BJ. And I just thought our board member was out of line there, okay?
I appreciate that.
Very, you know. I'm
All
very
right, I'm not
empathetic.
sure all that should be in the minutes. Okay, we have no public comments for this meeting. Nobody has signed up, so just want to let the board know that. The next item is the consent agenda, and so you have that before you. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries for the approval of the consent agenda. We're on to new business. The first new business item is the Hamilton Heights School Corporation versus the Fayette School Corporation. Michelle McGowan, I think you want to address the board? I believe I'm going to go ahead and start as she's moving. Are you going to speak from there? It will be very hard to see you.
Oh, would you, I'm happy
If
to.
you don't mind. I'm just going to actually make this a little formal. Today's April 9th, and the time is 9:10. We're here today in the matter of Hamilton Heights School Corporation versus Fayette School Corporation, which has been assigned a State Board of Education cause number of 1305009. This matter involves a dispute over transfer tuition between Hamilton Heights School Corporation and Fayette School Corporation. On March 12th, this board heard argument from the parties. This board moved to have the Board General Counsel to draft an opinion considering whether Indiana Code 2035-8 applies. We have received a memorandum and recommendation from Board General Counsel on on this matter. At this time, Michelle, can you come and discuss your memorandum and recommendation with us? Thank you.
If I could just clarify, I did not draft an opinion, but rather just a memo that provided legal analysis to the board. That was not intended to be an opinion, and hopefully by the format of it, we're able to recognize that. I don't want it to sound like I'm trying to draft an opinion for the board. I'm happy to walk through the memo, but I think that I didn't know if we wanted to do that in the public hearing, but my recommendation remains what it had been before as counsel to the board, but it's important for me to remind that you are the ultimate authority. I'm just giving you legal advice as counsel. You are able to accept my advice or make a decision otherwise. My advice has been that 20-35-8-2 applies in this area, and that would reverse what the ALJ, or the IHO here, had recommended, and it would require the transfer or school to pay actual costs for transportation rather than the formulaic cost.
So I have a question, if you don't mind. So the matter before us was to determine which method would be used for actual payment. And so both parties agreed that it was a student of special needs and transportation was provided. So your determination of the amount that's figured is based upon special education ruling to actually calculate the amount in the manner that Hamilton Heights recommended.
Correct. So it would be following the calculation that Hamilton Heights had recommended, but citing a different source of law. So it's just citing a different principle of law than what was cited by the ALJ or by the parties. Again, if in the language that you saw, 2035-8-2 applies specifically to those situations where a student is transferred, even by parental placement, to a different school corporation, and when the IEP requires transportation as a related service, then the transferor corporation is responsible for the payment of costs. So that is the calculation that Hamilton Heights had recommended through the hearing, but they cited 2026, and I am recommending that you adopt their calculation, but rather than going through 2026, cite 2035-8-2. This would reverse the hearing officer's recommended decision.
So, and I have one more question. So in all these matters that come before the board regarding this, are they all matters of students with special needs?
No, transfer tuition?
For transportation.
Well, this is an issue of first impression. So no, this is not the norm. This is the first time that the board has had to deal with how to calculate transportation costs, particularly in this circumstance.
I guess I didn't phrase my question well, so
okay.
Pardon me. So my question is, in this manner of actually asking another school corporation to pay the transportation costs, would that always involve a student of special needs? Like there's not a regular education student that would involve the transfer of transportation costs? I just want to know, is this a special education issue that we're dealing with totally from now on?
So again, and I think that part of this is just that this is an issue of first impression. So never before has the board had a transfer tuition case that addressed the calculation of transportation costs, period, whether in the context of a student with an IEP or not. So that's unusual in and of itself. So it's hard for me to say that this applies, I guess the response to your question is, I don't think this is common because in all of however many years that we've been doing transfer tuition, we've never had to deal with this particular situation before.
I'm not sure that we would know that exactly, because I think corporations just agree on how they're going to do the money piece of that. But I guess, can a regular student, is is there anything, I guess I just want to know if we're making a distinction between here's how we would calculate the cost if it involves special ed, and here's how we would calculate the cost if it was not special ed. Because there's a calculation that has been done through the OMB formula for 20 years. So I want to clarify if we're actually making precedents here. This is a special education issue. This is how we're saying that you should figure any issue that deals with a special education child as opposed to another situation.
Okay, and I apologize if I misunderstood your question. But yes, so this particular situation, the reason that I have recommended that we cite a different source of law is that it involves a student with disabilities who has transportation as a related service. And there is a statute that speaks directly to that, and therefore I think we should cite that particular statute.
So if we would, to make a motion, we would want to make sure that that was in the motion, that it was regarding a special education
Yes.
case. Okay, just to be clear, because it sets precedents
Correct.
regarding things going forward. So,
It would only apply to the students who fall within the parameters of 2035-82, and that's pretty specific that it has to be transportation as required by the IEP.
okay. So we have, are there any more questions to Michelle? Andrea?
In this case, the school of choice was indeed parental choice, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So my question is, if we set this precedent, do we somehow encourage the receiving school to turn down these kinds of students, since they're going to have to pay actual costs versus formulaic costs?
No, actually, I would think it's the opposite, because we are aligning with 2035-82 that requires that the transferor corporation pays the actual cost. And I can't speak to what the legislative intent was, but that does allow these corps that would otherwise not have any obligation to serve the students to not end up paying significant transportation costs. The school corporate legal settlement who receives the property tax levy where we get our transportation dollars.
So
would be
actually, the
responsible.
deterrent is eliminated.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Michelle, whatever decision we make today, is it subject to an appeals process of any kind, or is it over today and we move on?
It could be appealed to, through civil court. But I mean, your role at this particular point would be finished.
So one party could appeal it to civil court, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions for Michelle? Tony?
Michelle, is the legal brief in final form where it can be adopted as an opinion of the body?
I drafted that more as a memo on the issue of law. It's not how I would draft an opinion. I think that if the board wanted to put particular principles into an opinion, that would be better than the kind of lengthier memorandum of law that I provided.
If it is appealed, would you be willing to put our position forward in a more formal way for the next judge to review, if it is appealed?
If it were appealed, I would be more than happy to work with the Attorney General's office, who would represent the board, and provide them with what our rationale was. But I do think the statute somewhat speaks for itself. The language of 2035-82 is pretty specific, particularly when you look at it in the context of 2020. It cites to 2026, in fact, incorporates it by reference.
So question, Troy?
Michelle, can you review what our three choices are that we have today?
I was just going to do that.
Sorry.
That's okay. We can accept the hearing officer's opinion. We can remand to the hearing officer with direction for further consideration regarding the information you now have. We can accept the recommendation of the State Board General Counsel, or we could make our own finding and issue an order as we find appropriate. So those are our four options as I see them. And so I think we're to the point, unless we have any more questions, of entertaining a motion. Brad?
Madam Chairman, I would move that we accept the recommendation of Board Counsel to adopt Hamilton Heights actual cost.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I guess I would just maybe ask for an amendment, be considered friendly, hopefully, to have a written legal opinion, a formal opinion prepared supporting that motion if it passed.
Is that acceptable?
Could that be
to-
something that is prepared and then submitted for approval at our next meeting?
Yeah, because I
think
would
the
say
board
I
should
feel
review it and
uncomfortable
approve
doing
Yeah,
something I haven't
that's
seen.
why I'm throwing it out there, because I'm not sure if we want to vote to decide before we have the formal opinion, or vote to decide and then vote again on the formal opinion. My personal preference would be to wait to have the formal opinion and then decide the case.
And I guess I would add, I kind of thought we had a formal opinion here, so I wasn't aware that we did not.
Well, she's indicated it's not in a form to be released for publicly.
So what I hear, I've got a motion on the floor, so we're kind of in discussion. But you're really kind of saying that your motion might be, if this one fails, that we have a legal opinion drafted.
I mean, I can go either
think-
way on it. I just think because of the fact that it's really unique circumstances, it's an issue of first impression, that there should be a written opinion given the reasoning for the decision.
So are you wanting to make an amendment to the main motion?
Yeah, I was asking for an amendment, but if it's not accepted as friendly, I think Michelle wants to say something.
So Brad, are you willing to,
Favorable to what exactly?
Yeah, I want to.
Michelle?
Board counsel believes it's, I think it is. I don't know the legal side of it, so I have to yield to the attorney.
I would be more than happy for the memorandum of law that I provided to you all to release that publicly. I just was meaning it's not in the form of a court or, an order. I didn't draft it like that, but I do think that it's formal, as Superintendent Ritz said, and we could always put that on, provide it publicly, or put it on the website, or whatever we would want. It is formal and can be released. I just didn't think it was in the form of an order, but if the board were to vote to take action and say we want to do X or Y, we could offer that publicly in support of it, to support the rationale.
Well,
And-
this-
And what I'm suggesting, Michelle, is that it actually be prepared as a formal order and memorandum that we all sign off on, and, more formal proceeding. That will be part of the
So-
record and precedent of the body.
So currently, Michelle, the memorandum you sent to us says this memorandum contains FERPA-protected information and is not to be disclosed.
I would redact. There are just two things when taken in combination that could potentially identify the student, and we would redact that.
Brad?
Yeah, I was going to suggest maybe to Tony's request for the amendment, if we shape the amendment to basically include in that motion, basically making the necessary adjustments to be able to publicly release the memorandum we're referencing up here, as well as moving forward by the next meeting and having an opinion if we accomplish what you're after, Tony.
So why don't you state your motion?
In addition to accepting the board's counsel on the action, I'm publicly released. Dr. Walker still wants to see us bring.
Yeah, well, I'm basically asking that it be decided by a formal order, that we all actually sign off on. It's a slight difference, but it is a technical difference as to how it's perceived going forward. If it's just a,
I think the board can take action today because we have this recommendation with a lengthy memo that describes the recommendation. And we can also request that we have a formalized order or a formalized opinion that is prepared, subject to board approval at our next meeting, that, it puts it in the form that I think you're looking for, Tony. And but I don't think that precludes us from taking action based on the information we have before us. Then we have an order that I think succinctly describes the action and the opinion we're taking.
So let's deal with the motion and the amendment. So we have a motion on the floor that says we're going to accept the board counsel's recommendation and prepare the recommendation for public release. That's the motion.
And the third part of that is to bring back to the board an actual legal.
So does that, then we wouldn't really be taking action now. We'd be delaying it till the next board meeting. No?
We'd be
we're not
taking
delaying
action.
anything. We're gonna
We'd be making the
pass it.
decision, but we'd have a formalized
We wanna see
opinion
it.
that we would subsequently approve at our next meeting.
All right. Do I have a second to that?
So my second would stand then with, but we're actually passing this today. We're passing the resolution and move on the council's recommendation with those other.
I think we are, so now that we have the motion with the amendment added to it, and we have a second, is there any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
No.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes?
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes?
Pardon me, Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Abstain. Now we're ready for discussion of transition to college and career-ready assessments, which will be followed by the action item proposal to move Core Link administration to the fall of 2014. Michelle Walker from the Department of Education.
Getting instruction on the two clickers that I have to make sure I use this morning. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Superintendent Ritz and members of the board, it's my pleasure to bring 4 agenda items to you throughout the day. So I'll be spending the day with you at various times at the podium. The first agenda item is to talk about the transition of standards to college and career ready assessments. And so we have 2 PowerPoints, and hopefully, Laura, I can handle this. They're both the same, one for the audience, obviously, one for the board members. What I'd like to do is walk you through the PowerPoint and then talk about the memorandum that you received yesterday.
Michelle, do we have a copy of this?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Danielle, were
It's
copies prepared?
just 12 slides.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very brief, but we can certainly send it.
Okay, I'm just making sure that we
Sure.
do not have it, so we need to
Okay, let me.
pay attention.
Ours look good. It's a skill set I didn't know I had. First thing I want to really talk about is opportunity to learn and opportunity to access assessments. And some of this information isn't new, but I think it's a good review for us to, as we think about the work that we will be doing, especially as your subcommittee meets this afternoon to talk about assessment. One of the things I wanted to do is kind of set the stage about opportunity to learn with regard to standards. So obviously you have important work you'll be doing later this month with regard to our new standards. And that opportunity to learn is extremely critical, that students have access to the standards and the content for which they would be held accountable on an assessment. The opportunity to access the assessment is really more what I'm going to focus on today, and that's all about making sure that actually students and educators, especially their teachers, have access to look at new item types, those that are technology enhanced, and I want to share some examples with you this morning. And also looking at how do we assess content that is much more rigorous than our currently assessed content on our I-STEP test. So talking a little bit about the transition of both the standards and the assessment for just a moment again. As everyone is aware, the board does have a directive to adopt standards by July 1, and we're on track currently for you to review those on April 28th, after the roundtable reviews those on April 21st. So thank you, Dr. Oliver, for your comments at the beginning of the meeting. It's been a really exciting, exhausting process, but it's been a thrill to be a part of it, just for my own personal experience, and have worked with a lot of really great educators across the state. So it's been a really good process. So obviously, once those standards are adopted, we have a responsibility to teach those standards and assess whether or not students are learning them. And the federal requirement is the one listed here at the bottom, that states do have to provide a college and career ready assessment by the spring of 15. So we have made a plan to do that, and I'd like to explain that this morning. I've mentioned already, talking about the technology enhanced items, which I will display for you, 2 examples of English and 2 of math. And also, more importantly, that we're measuring, again, our college and career ready standards as deemed ready by our college and career ready panel that Dr. Oliver was able to visit. So I do want to share with you some of the item types for both ELA and math with regard to technology enhanced items. For ELA, there is something called a multiple correct response, and I am going to show you an example of that. And that's also a category in the mathematics area, so they look a little bit different, but it's a chance really with all of these item types, quite frankly, for us to get at a deeper level of understanding for students, which is something we've been wanting to do for a long time. Drag and drop is probably not unknown to you. That's a common phrase, I think, in the world of online, whether you're banking or buying something on Amazon or a student participating in a new assessment coming up. The passage base, there are 2-part items, and I want to show you one of those this morning as well. I'm especially excited, having taught ELA and math in my former teaching career, I'm excited about the passages because for the first time ever, we can actually highlight portions of the passage and have students defend their answer with evidence from the passage specifically identified. So I'll show that to you this morning as well. And then in the mathematics area, we have a math palette, which is new, and so I want to show that to you and explain how that works. So the first item is from mathematics. This one is actually using the math palette. And this math palette would be static on any items that involve a math palette. So it would always have these numbers and these symbols, and students would actually construct their answer, whether it's forming an equation, for example, or in this case, a student would actually be deciding on a number answer for the box where it says books to the left. And so the student would drag what looks like tiles actually over, and again, this is part of a math palette. So the student would be building their answer here based on what's in the math palette, what's available to him or her.
Michelle, I noticed several people taking notes. Can we make this available to the board
sure.
members electronically later?
Yes.
That'd be great.
Yes, these can be widely shared. These are
Okay,
not secure.
thank you.
Thank you for asking. One other example of mathematics. Now I'm a little challenged there.
Can you go back to that other slide?
Oh, sure.
So I want to point out something from a teacher's point of view, actually.
Okay.
The word construct is on there, which will be a new vocabulary term for kids taking a test. What does that mean? So there'll be lots of different directions that students may not be used to, as well as teachers won't be used to in giving this type of question. So the word construct is, and you're going to see some other vocabulary pieces that we have to be sure kids understand what that's asking them to do.
So that's, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Andrea.
So why is the verb construct used versus determine the answer? Why are we using that verb?
So in this particular item, the word construct is on the lower right, as you can see here, indicating that construct is a word that they may see on an item. In this particular item, the actual word is drag tiles to build an answer, and I hope you can see that from your seat.
So they're not actually figuring this out on their, I mean, they're not constructing an answer. They're not building an answer. They're supposed to do a mathematical calculation of the answer. So why don't we say calculate instead of construct?
Right.
Well, they're going to drag and drop, really.
Yes.
But they may be introduced. I was using the word construct as something that the students might see later. But-
Absolutely, and I think it's a great point because what this actually refers to is vocabulary that might be unfamiliar to students. And so one of the things I'm going to talk about this morning is how important the professional development is, really for their teachers, but as well as for the development of student skills. And I think you raised an excellent point, Ms. Neal, about if a student doesn't know what it means to build an answer, we might not be ascertaining how well they know how to do the mathematics.
Well, and my concern is that the word construct is a politically loaded word in education.
I don't think I have an example of one that has that word in it on the screen. Let's take a look at the next math item and see if we do. So this one actually has two components. This is a Part A and Part B, a two-part item in mathematics. You'll see a two-part item in ELA as well. This first one has, as you can see, some tiles that already have numbers on them. And so this is different from a math palette, obviously, because in the math palette you saw the numbers and the symbols. This is responses that could fit into the sequence of numbers that the student is actually responding to on this item. Jack's counting by tens, and the next three numbers in the sequence are missing, and so the student needs to drag and drop the information that should be placed in each of those boxes. The second part of this item is asking the student to actually select three responses that would be correct responses to counting by fives. And so, again, this is one that I'm really excited about because in the past, we might have a multiple choice item and they would select the correct answer. And now we can actually find out whether or not the student really understands how to count by fives by picking multiple examples of how that is evidenced within the responses. So again, this is known as a multiple correct response. Oh, sorry.
David?
What's the advantage of having students drag and drop the correct answer into the answer box versus just writing the answer in the
Sure.
box?
That's a great question. And I think because these can be scored electronically, the turnaround time is extremely quick. You know, almost instantaneous, frankly, if we're just giving these type of items, for example, because the student's item can be scored right away. And so I think the student still has a chance to do their work, but to display it on the online system. With the technology enhanced item, we can get at a deeper level of understanding without having an expense, for example, of hand scoring of those items, and also trying to get at using technology that hopefully is part of their instruction with regard to, for example, digital content. Other questions before we look at ELA? So here's an example of a passage. And this is a multiple correct response. The question is asking about the two students who actually did not walk to school. And so the student needs to carefully read the passage and then determine which of the two students would be a correct response for this. Again, there are two correct answers, so we would be looking for both of those from the student. And the last one I'd like to share is the one that has the passage that has the highlighting. And this is a two-part item. As I mentioned in ELA, there's two-part as well as in mathematics. In the first portion, the student is actually identifying what the big idea of this story is. And in the second portion, the student is actually selecting a highlighted part within the passage that provides evidence and best supports what they marked in their answer for Part A. So here the student looks at the highlighted portions to determine which one of those actually best supports the response that they select in Part A. So again, this is an example of something that we don't currently do today, but that would be part of a technology-enhanced item. Any questions on that one?
So we're moving away from choosing a right answer in multiple choice to actually solving problems and actually reading context
Right.
and determining evidence that might even support your answer.
And that's a good way of saying it, I think, too. It's really getting at more critical thinking, higher level thinking. We can ask more sophisticated questions, I think, because we have the ability to build within the system some of the pieces like identifying sections of the passage.
Andrea?
One of my new concerns is based on a study that just came out in the last few days suggesting, and it was a study of struggling middle school readers, that their comprehension actually goes down on iPads and tablets versus on paper. So will there be the opportunity for schools that prefer to continue to give paper testing?
So I think I'd like to answer that in two ways. The first thing is that anytime we actually switch item types like this, a significant change, we do a comparability study. So we ensure that if a student is using paper, and a good example of that would be a student who needs a paper for an accommodation. I'll get back to your question in a moment about all students, but I think one of the things we have to keep in mind when we build assessments is it has to be for all students. And so we need to make sure that this item actually could be ported into a paper version and still be assessing the same construct of the item. With regard to paper pencil, one of the things we do right now with iStep Online and ECAs Online is looking at the capability of the system at the school and the connectivity that they have. And so there are some cases where we still have to use paper. I think we are trying to really help the field transition to online because it is much more, hopefully, matching instruction. Sure.
But could a school choose, if it decided that it preferred text literacy to digital literacy, and studies are starting to show that those are different, could a school choose, even if it had the capacity to do it on computer, to do it on paper and pencil?
And I think that's a policy question that I guess I don't feel like I'm qualified to answer at this point, because that would be something that I really think the subcommittee for assessment should be grappling with. I think you raised some interesting questions that really should be part of that discussion. So I appreciate you bringing them up today.
Okay, thank you.
I think you have another question.
Oh, David?
The question comes in whether these are summative or formative assessments. And I think it's really important to have formative assessment components within summative assessments so that schools are receiving back diagnostic information. And I'm really pleased by the technology-enhanced assessments we're moving toward, because it really speeds up the time for information to get
Right.
back to schools. Can you discuss with us the diagnostic components that schools will receive?
And that's also one that I don't feel qualified to respond to, because I think it would really depend on proposals that are given to us through the RFP process and what specific vendors might have to offer, what the market will bear in terms of what products and services are available. But I think, to your point, I think we're all very interested in making sure that there are tools that give teachers diagnostic information, formative assessment, as well as summative. So I think that's a trend that probably the board would like to continue.
As we write the RFP, because it's us that are going to write it, or staff, or DOE, someone's going to write it on our behalf, I would ask that component, that diagnostic component, so that we're providing great information back to teachers to inform their instruction, be included in that RFP. So I'm not on the assessment committee, but I would ask my assessment colleagues to be sure that we do have a diagnostic component in the RFP.
And I think we're all very interested in that, so, but thank you for raising that issue. You have another
Brad?
question?
Yeah, I have actually a couple of questions for you, and I guess I'm trying to go through this transition, and I understand the reason why we have to go through the transition. But I'm seeing iStep, I'm seeing Core Links, I'd like to hear you talk about CCRTA.
Sure.
I'm not real sure
I will be,
came in.
yeah.
And then the potential should be recommending an RFP says that we ought to have a statewide assessment aligned to new standards. That's like 4 assessments right now, and I'm really concerned with that. Practice, but as I understand Core Links, it was negotiated as part of the CTV McGraw-Hill contract. 10 questions in math, 10 questions in language arts. I find it hard to believe that's the only way we can prepare students for piloting something anyway. So in my mind, why wouldn't we go down a path of actually piloting something that's going to mirror the actual standards that we're adopting? Pointing out vocabulary here, I think it's reasonable some of that may find itself in the new standards, but that's an assumption. I'd love for you to just kind of push back.
Sure.
So if you can refer
I
to the
was
paper
gonna
that was
say,
passed out to you.
You're kind of teeing up the rest of my presentation very well.
We're going to be recommending that.
And I also am going to speak to the different ones that you asked about. So if you can bear with me, I would like to talk about that as it comes throughout the slides. Is that okay? Sure. Okay. Other questions before we move on to the next slide? So, perfect timing, Dr. Oliver, that I wanted to talk about looking to the future and what's on the horizon, and a little bit about what we currently have planned what some of our options are, talking again about the need for professional development, how do we actually really make sure that that's robust, and kind of what do we do next. And what I put on this chart is just to kind of clarify that we currently have 3 assessments that our students are participating in: ISTEP, IMAST, or ISTAR. And you might remember that ISTAR is for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. And that is an assessment that right now is an in-house product, but we need to move it, as well as our other assessments, to align to college and career readiness. And so I listed that under 1415, so I'm at the bottom of this chart here for just a moment. So thinking about those students and making sure that we are meeting their learning needs as well. And we're very actively involved in that process. IMAST, just a quick reminder on IMAST, that's the Indiana Modified Achievement Standards Test. This is our 5th year to administer that test. It is sunsetting after this spring. It was known as the, quote, 2% test, if you will, when the U.S. Department of Education released federal regulations around a 2% additional group of students that could participate in a modified achievement standards test. So IMAST students are actually being measured on the same content as ISTEP students, but the items have been modified. And we use universal design already with ISTEP, but we took more measures with that regard, I'll say, with regard to IMAST. And teachers actually worked on all of the ISTEP items that became IMAST items. They modified them with us. So that's been an exciting process. I'm a little tear to see that go, just because it's been an exciting journey for the last 5 years. But I did put NA here because, as you well know, we won't be offering that in the next 2 years. The primary reason why we won't be offering it is because we will be moving to college and career ready assessments, and students who would participate right now in both ISTEP and IMAST would be expected to participate in those new assessments, that they would be accessible for all of those students. So now to the top row, really getting back to Dr. Oliver's question and giving you some more context around the information that you see on this slide. So a little bit of history, since you kind of went back in time. I'd like to go back there and give you some history about where did CoreLink come from, what were we going to do with it, why were we going to use it, things like that. So in the spring of 2013, we were actually going to administer CoreLink as a way for us to help the field, especially teachers and students, transition to an assessment that would be measuring more college and career ready content. And as we were going to move into Park at that time, it was a transition that we wanted to do for our state, for Hoosiers, to say, we don't want this to be kind of just all of a sudden change, but we want to build up and scaffold this change. And so we worked with CTB and asked them if we could use some of their items in what they call their CoreLink item bank. When the legislature actually placed the standards on pause in the spring of 2013, we felt like it wouldn't be prudent to administer the assessment. So we did pull the administration from spring 13 and moved it to spring 14. And so right now we're on target, and I do want to talk about this in more detail in a few moments, but we're on target to administer this in the spring. It is a 10 item, as you mentioned, Dr. Oliver. My staff actually selected the items from the item bank, and then, I know this isn't a word, but I like to use it, Indiana-sized the items so that they would be aligned to our current standards. And so therefore, the items that we have in CoreLink for Indiana actually are not available to any other state in the nation, because they're our own now. We've actually modified them to make them our own. And so we wanted to have a very short experience, but one that would be meaningful for both students and teachers, so that they didn't feel the brunt of the college and career ready lift, because the rigor is going to be extremely different with new assessment items. And we really didn't want them to wait until the required assessment, which is spring of 15, which is our CCRTA, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So our efforts were around how can we help the field with, and it's about 30 minutes in length, including instructions for math, and the same for ELA. So as of this moment, except I do have a proposal I'm going to talk with you about, we're planning to give that this spring so that there would not be the shock of next spring of the CCRTA. So as you well know, House Enrolled Act 1427 is requiring us to administer ISTEP one more year. So we will have ISTEP in the 2014-15 school year. But also at that point in time, in the spring of 2015, we will be administering a new college and career ready assessment. And so one of the things we knew we had to do was build that assessment to get it ready so that we could, again, provide professional development and help to the field and support in making sure that students would be ready for that. So actually not later this month, but later in May, we're scheduled to bring educators together with us, with our staff in assessment, to design the specifications for the College and Career Ready Transition Assessment, to identify what are the limits, and to establish the blueprint for this assessment. Again, this is a requirement from the U.S. Department of Education that all states have a College and Career Ready test on the ground, operational in the spring of 15. So when we had our visit during our monitoring time last fall, that was one of the questions they asked me the most, quite frankly, is how was Indiana going to address this, knowing that we had to give ISTEP for one more year. So I did let them know that we had Core Link, that we had been modifying items to meet our current standards, but having them in more of a college and career ready format so that there would be a transition for the field, and we would be ready, and we will be ready to give that required assessment in the spring of 15. So that assessment actually is a part of our contract extension with CTB. I'm sorry, I'm doing a lot of talking.
Brad?
Would you like to ask a question?
I'm sorry, I do. I need a little clarification. 'Cause
Okay.
One of the things I've been trying to Core Links is a different assessment from the College and Career Readiness Transition Assessment.
Yeah, CoreLink, in my proposal, I'm actually renaming it because CoreLink is an item bank in any state or school district or country, for that matter, could actually purchase items from CTB's CoreLink item bank. And the ones we selected, again, we made them our own, so they're not like available for anyone. I think I mentioned that already. But the CoreLink item bank, well, I think I've answered that. But the College and Career Ready, what we would like to call CoreLink is the College and Career Ready Phase 1.
Right. I'm trying not to get ahead of you. I just want to try to
Okay.
understand, because I haven't been able to trace back where the board ever approved the College and Career Readiness Transition Assessment. I've probably missed it. I was referenced to a December document that showed where we set the
December?
window for core links.
Right.
But I don't know how that translates into an adoption of an assessment. And that's what I'm struggling with. It's one thing, and the motion was to set the window. I get that, and I actually voted against it because I'm concerned about core links from the standpoint of why are we getting out ahead of getting our standards adopted, but that's another discussion. But when did we adopt CCRTA?
Yeah, so CCRTA is simply a transition to be able to say to schools, here's what this is going to look like for accountability starting in spring 16, and for us to be able to do our due diligence with the U.S. Department of Ed to say, yes, we have a transition assessment that we're not going to use for accountability, but that we are meeting the requirements of the U.S. Department of Education.
But to your knowledge, the board hasn't affirmed that's what the board has said is the test that we want to use to do that.
Yeah, I think the boards understand, I think the board is interested, this is just what I understand, in assessment for the future, which would be after ISTEP, which really would start in 15-16, but I don't know if.
Yeah, and in December, we approved the assessment windows for these two transitions to occur before we actually have our College and Career Ready assessment for 2015-16.
It's it's because we're no longer in Park and because we're required to give ISTEP, we're kind of in this unique situation where
Right.
we're having to serve two masters, to be honest.
Has there been any conversation with USDOE about the unique circumstances that have unfolded in
yes.
Indiana? And I'm sure there has, but so I'm just asking, because I understand the waiver basically says that by spring of 2015, we have to provide evidence of mastery against college and career ready standards, yet that will also be the end of the first year of the new standards we adopt on the 28th. So I totally appreciate and get it, but I have to balance that against feeling like I have to advocate for the students who may be facing 4 assessments in this transition, and I'm questioning why. And I really don't understand that.
Sure.
Because Core Links is going to give them, from what I can see, no viable data, especially if we move it to the fall.
At the grade level, it will. And I can talk more about that.
So
I'd be
let's-
interested to hear that because I'm
Yeah.
struggling with that because if we're going to take the time away from class to do it,
Oh, sure.
I'm
You want it to be
wrestling
meaningful.
what is the return
Right.
on the investment of
Absolutely.
that time?
Absolutely.
So let's,
Oh, I'm sorry. go
I
ahead.
don't know what your next slide is, but I think we're ready to go to, at least in a discussion mode, to talk about the actual proposal that we
Okay,
have before us.
sure.
So is that what we're getting to, so that we can have that dialogue? Or what did you have as your next slide?
So let me try to answer the quick question that Dr. Oliver asked, and then I can move on, if that's
Okay.
all right. I have to remember what it was now. I'm sorry, I had some whispering in my ear. That's all right. What did you ask me?
I'm trying
Oh,
to-
oh, I know what I
yeah,
was
go
going to say,
ahead.
sorry. CoreLink is a matrix sampled assessment. So there are 4 forms, and within the grade level at the school, each student will take one of those 4 forms, and that data will aggregate up so that we can give data to the school based on the students in that grade level to let them know how well they did on the college and career ready assessment. So they will get data back, not at the student level because there are too few questions, which you probably already understand, with only having 10 items, but we are giving enough items to measure at the grade level for the
They'll
school.
only have been teaching the new standards for 5 weeks.
Well, it's almost like a pretest, frankly, because it is no stakes. We want to make sure kids are really interacting and engaging with these items and not feeling like there are any stakes attached to it. That was one of the things that educators really talked to us about, was how are we going to use these new item types without having accountability tied to it right away? And that was one of the things we advocated for, was not using, and the CCRTA is just 2 sessions after the I-STEP, and I can talk more about that, but we don't want to use it for accountability because, to your point, we're just going to be starting those standards. And I think to Superintendent Ritz's point, what I'd like to mention about on the memo, to get to that, is that one of the things that we would like to do is ask for your approval to actually move the assessment to September, because we could then make sure it's aligned to our new standards. It may be, but you haven't adopted them yet, so we don't want to assume anything. Also, we want to make sure that all the IMAS students participate in the CoreLink or the College and Career Ready Assessment Phase 1. And one of my biggest concerns, frankly, right now is that only if the school decides the IMAS student could participate would they be able to. So I really want to make sure there's opportunity and access and equity for those students. And also, many of our schools use iPads, and right now CoreLink is not iPad enabled, but it would be in the fall. So that was another reason, and you see all these on the memo, so I won't read that to you. But those were several of the reasons why. Also, we could rename the assessment because, again, we do want it to be aligned to our college and career ready standards. But I think there are some questions.
So why don't you talk about the phases? Because I think
Sure.
we're kind of in this limbo here. What does the whole package look like
Okay.
to transform to the new college and career-ready types of questions that kids are going to experience?
Okay, before we go to that, I have a basic question before we move on. Is the U.S. Department of Education requiring that we give CoreLink?
The CoreLink, no, it's part of our transition plan that we.
They do require a transition
Yeah,
plan.
they do. And when they were here for our monitoring visit, and they were extremely concerned that because we're giving I-STEP, that they thought we would not be doing anything with college and career readiness. So we did assure them that we were going to use CoreLink in spring 13, but we moved it to 14, and that it fits into our transition plan, and we align the items to our standards.
And they can do that, why? Because of our waiver or some federal law regulation making us, how can they make us give CoreLink?
I think it's more, from my perspective, frankly, it's a moral imperative because, you know, teachers' salary is going to depend on how well students perform in spring of 16 on the assessment. School letter grades are going to be based on it. And we didn't really, again, want to have the whole shock of, oh, so this is what it looks like and this is how rigorous it is. But almost like a pretest, and again, it's just 10 items in ELA and 10 in math, to give students that opportunity to see it, interact with it, have teachers have professional development following that based on, so how are my kids actually going to respond to these items for the future, because I don't know how to teach that standard. And just really trying to get into how can we use it as a springboard, frankly, to the transition that we know we have to make with regard to a more robust assessment and eventually a very high stakes one.
So
Carrie?
other than CoreLink, none of our other tests do that, accomplish
Right,
teaching standards?
right.
And, all right, just one last question.
Sure.
I guess I had been under the impression that CoreLink was somehow linked to Common Core, there was a transition test for Common Core.
Yes, that's one of the reasons why I would like to rename it, frankly, Mr. Walker, because
Because we're going to make it our own.
yes, because anyone could go to the CTV website, for example, and if you look up Core Link, it says it's aligned to Common Core, and it is, but the items that we're using are aligned to Indiana standards, and we want to make sure that they align to our brand-new ones. If they're the same, great. If they change, we want to change the items out before we administer it.
So now that we've tossed Common Core, that's still going to be a relevant test.
I'm sorry.
It's
Now
a
that
huge
we've
bank,
tossed
it's a
Common
huge bank
Core,
of questions.
Is it still going to be relevant?
Yes,
Or is it
Oh,
gonna be-
yes.
Certain questions.
yes, because we will be able to
Yes.
do that according to our standards. We're able to change it. Carrie?
Okay, so thinking ahead to the 2015, 2016, and we have a new assessment. At some point, we have to pilot the new assessment. We have to pilot what it will be. So my question is if and when we pilot it, it will be in the year before, 2014, 2015, would that not meet the requirements of the waiver for the CCRTA? So that we, again, aren't redundant in testing. And I understand it's like a pre-test, post-test, but at the same time, I would never pre-test, post-test my kids on two completely different test systems or platforms and aligned to standards. And even like the word construct, if that's in the CCRTA, but it's not in the new assessment, my kids get off the computer and they go, what does the word construct mean? And now I'm going to spend time on vocabulary that's not relevant to the test that we will be evaluated on.
So let me see if I can try to answer several questions that you have within that. First of all, the CCRTA, or the Phase 2 of our College and Career Ready Scaffolded Transition Plan, actually would be aligned to the exact same standards that the new assessment would be in 15-16. So the word construct wouldn't appear on only one, to use that as an example. What we're doing with the CCRTA is exactly what we did with IMEST, and we used an operationalized field test model, which is very common in the industry. That's what I would also recommend for our new assessment. That way you don't have to pilot the items in the spring of 15 for your 16 assessment. You can use item stats from the CCRTA to inform that. And so one of the things, anytime you change to a new assessment, one of the critical pieces, whether it's a new vendor or the same vendor, is the transition of the former assessment to the new one. And that's something that we're going to pay a lot of attention to and put a lot of focus on, because we want to make sure that what we do in the spring of 15 enables us to be ready for 16, and that we don't have the redundancies that you mentioned, because we definitely don't want to double test the students. That's for sure.
So do you have a slide on the phases of actually for the transition?
I'm not sure I have,
I'd like to ask one question.
well, I have a phase, oh, go ahead.
You said,
Dan?
mentioned correctly that
Sorry.
the teacher evaluation, a certain percent of their evaluation is based on the outcomes of what students actually learn. As we understand the test, what percent of their evaluation?
I believe that's a locally determined. I'm not an expert on
No, I think
that.
that the board passed something, and
Okay,
it seems
I'm
around
sorry, I
about a
don't know
quarter.
the answer to that, Mr. Elsner.
That'd be a good, to bring to the board what we actually did this year in that regard.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what the answer is for a percent.
I'm feeling a need
Okay, I'm moving
in
on.
some fashion
Okay.
to talk about the phases
Okay, I have a
of the
slide that talks
transition.
about phase 1, and I'm trying to get my clicker to work. I need technical help.
Can we get somebody to actually do the computer?
Yeah, it's the right one, isn't it? Thank you. Sorry about that.
So I think I hear the question from the board in multiple ways. Is Core Link necessary to the transition? And if it is, can you talk about why it is?
Yes.
So talk about your phases.
Sure. So Core Link, or College and Career Ready Assessment Phase 1, which is what's on your memorandum in terms of the title, is the first step in our phased-in scaffolded approach to make sure that we actually do provide opportunity to access assessments. You might remember in the very beginning of the slides, I talked about opportunity to learn as well as opportunity to access assessments. So we do have an obligation to provide that for students and teachers. And actually this spring, we want to start our professional development by actually working with teachers on the sample items I showed you and other sample items, so that once you approve our new standards, teachers can already start thinking about, so how will those standards be assessed in a new way moving forward? In new assessments, what would that look like? So the first step for us is the College and Career Ready Phase 1, or Core Link, which we would like to rename because they are Indiana's designed items. The next slide actually talks about why we want to phase in and really why we feel we have a responsibility to do this piece. And that is because we do want to make sure that we give schools some information about how well students are doing on the new content. I know it will be new. Much of it will be hopefully things that teachers were already thinking about as they think about preparing students for the future, but wanting to make sure that we give them some hard data, if you will, on how well are students doing right now on college and career ready content. Is it a mountain that we're going to have to climb to get them ready? Is it a hill? What are the standards that we think need more emphasis? And also to make sure students have that opportunity, again, with no stakes, to practice. Because it will be, even if they're testing online right now, it's going to be asking them to do things that they aren't doing currently on iStep Plus Online. So making sure that we give them, that's really our due diligence about the opportunity to access the assessment. And the use of those results, one of the things that we want to do is use the data, as Dr. Oliver had asked about getting data from this short assessment, that we wanted to ask enough questions that we gave kids a good experience and that we could actually aggregate that data and use that feedback to guide student learning as well as professional development needs for teachers. We know with our new standards, and we're working on a plan actually that we've been sharing with you already at board meetings about transitioning teachers and really helping the field understand the new standards that you're about to adopt and how they'll be using those in the classroom. So this is kind of a connected piece with our standards, goes hand in hand, the assessment, and how do we help prepare everyone for that. I just kind of ended on a slide here about professional development because one of the key things that we are trying to focus on with regard to our transition plan, with the phase 1 being in September. If you look on your memo, if I can direct you there for just a moment, the entire month of September is listed here. Labor Day happens to be on the 1st of the month this year. And we've gotten some feedback on, we've already extended our testing windows due to the crazy weather we've had in Indiana. Schools have asked, is it possible to give this later? We want to give it, but we really don't want to give it in May because it's just too crazy based on the weather-related issues and other things that are happening in their school. Some of our schools actually are out for the summer when our Core Link window is going on this spring. So that is of a concern to me. So the proposed testing dates on the memo are September 2nd through the 30th, so the entire month. For them, there's a short practice test as well as operational. Again, it's 30 minutes including the teacher's instructions. So the student testing time is about 16 minutes to 22 minutes. And so, we're trying to make sure it's as non-invasive as possible, but give information that's actionable and that's meaningful. Sorry, I think there's a hand up.
So it's 1 hour of time.
Right.
So we have met with stakeholders regarding this because we heard a lot from the field. We heard that they wanted to have the core links aligned to the new standards, which is appropriate. And so I called together the various associations. I called together the Charter Association, the Private School Association, the Teachers Association, the School Boards Association, I'm trying to list them all here, the Principals Association, the Superintendents Association, and we talked about the need for students and teachers to see what these look like at least 2 times, so that we could have good, robust conversation and make sure that we felt comfortable with them before we gave the spring portion. We don't want to have students nor educators feeling anxious about seeing them for the first time at one time, and then that's all they're going to see them again until we actually give it the next year. So we wanted to have 2 times in place. We wanted to be sure we're going to have minimal assessment questions so that we can gather enough information to inform what it is that we do. The college and career ready assessments in the spring, and we're having conversations now to minimize what that looks like. So we have 1 session here, okay, that we're wanting to do in the fall, and then there will be a couple other sessions that we will want to do in the spring that can be in a combination with our March and our May, so we're not going to overtax students. You're talking to the person here as the superintendent of public instruction who wants less testing. So that's the first thing that everybody needs to understand. But I also understand as a classroom teacher that you have to be exposed to the new types of questions that are going to happen. And we want it to be aligned. Also, special education students for the first time next year, will not be allowed to take IMAST. And so we want to give them opportunities to see these new types of questions with the accommodations that will be afforded to them. Those accommodations are not ready yet to do it with the spring core link that we were going to do, and that is crucial. We've decided to move on and give the special education students opportunity to see those questions as well in a new format that they've not seen before. In addition, we've had many schools that now have one-to-one totally with iPads. And so we want to be sure that everybody is going to have the opportunity to experience these questions and be able to work with them in their locals.
Superintendent?
Yes, Brad?
I'd like to offer a couple comments, and I appreciate, I want to say first and foremost, I appreciate the work the department's trying to get teachers and students ready for this, because it is a transition. But there's a couple things that have been said that really concern me, because when we say them, it has an element of truth to it, but it's not quite accurate. And for example, we keep saying that core links are required, but it's only required to the extent that that's what the department has informed the US DOE that we intend to do in the transition. The waiver doesn't require that. The waiver requires CCR data be submitted by the spring of 2015. So I want to be cautious about that. Secondly, I would say there's a disconnect between what's being said here today by the department and what's being said in the field, because I have principals coming unglued right now, and my understanding as part of what came out of that stakeholder meeting is a need to move it to the fall because there's problems with the iPads working right and the technology is not quite there, and there's concerns. And I've got emails sent to me that I can provide you where that's a concern. And all I'm saying is this: when I look at where we're at now, it seems like the leadership of the board has to be the earth has moved, and that we've had some legislative changes. We've got new standards coming. And if we're really interested in making sure that they have opportunities, we're assuming that the core links questions are going to match standards that we haven't even seen the final draft of and adopted. That makes no sense to me. It makes more sense for me, in my mind, for us to refer this to the assessment subcommittee to study so that we can rethink the transition plan, given that we know, as Carrie said, we're going to have a pilot in 14-15 that should, in fact, mirror those standards. Now, I know it still keeps a piece out there that we got to resolve about what do we do about data in 2015, but there's a lot of smart people here that think we could figure that out rather than going down a path that potentially has us giving 4 assessments next year, because I don't think I'm wrong on that. I think it's going to be I-STEP because we have to, because of teacher effectiveness ratings, as Dan Elsner pointed out. It's going to be core links if we stay on this path, and what that's going to do for us, I don't get it. I don't even see it as a pre-screening because it can't possibly be based on standards right now because we haven't passed them yet. So that's a big assumption. Then you got CCRTA, and then you've got whatever we pilot. So I just put that in front of my colleagues. I think it would be more beneficial. This is the kind of thing that I think the assessment subcommittee was tasked to look at as a part of that adoption. But maybe it's part of that broader conversation of transition. But it concerns me when we say that because it sounds right. But if you really think about it, something's not right.
So just the technology question, it will not work on iPads right now. That's why, one of the reasons why I'm recommending that we move it to the fall. Because it will work on iPads then, but there's not time to make it work on iPads now. The other thing I wanted to point out about the standards is once the standards are adopted on the 28th, then we will review those 10 items at each grade level and change them out if they need to be to align to the standards. So just want to make sure that's really clear. If we give it in September, it will align to our new standards, whatever those are.
So I think the question before us is to,
The question is whether or not we would like to move it to the fall, I believe, right?
so the motion before us is to adopt the proposal from the Department of Education to move Phase 1 of the College and Career Ready Assessments from May 5 to the 23 to September 2, 30. And it includes a 30-minute session on mathematics and a 30-minute session on English language arts. Do I have a second?
Can I ask a question, or do you want to wait until discussion?
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
I have two questions. First of all, does our current contract with CTB, would that need to be amended in order to allow for this change?
That's a great question. No, we actually have already paid for this because we were going to give it in spring 13.
Okay.
And we moved it
Yeah,
to
it was
spring
paid
14.
for several years back.
Yes.
And my second question is, do we have the option as a board, rather than moving it to fall, instead to drop it completely pending a new assessment that will come out of the assessment subcommittee? Is that an option based on what we're aligned with the waiver with the federal requirements?
I guess from my perspective, and I'm sure Superintendent Ritz wants to chime in, but I think the challenge is that we would not have an assessment on the ground by September to be able to use that to give feedback to students and teachers early enough for them to actually have the school year to get up to speed on what it is that they need to, based on college and career readiness, that they maybe aren't currently doing. So I think that would be a challenge. The fact that it's already paid for and that it is very minimal would be, I guess, points that I would want to just reiterate. But
There's going to be a lot of anxiety about the college and career
I
ready
think teachers are
assessments
going to
and the
be
type of
really
questions.
nervous that they don't have, you know, an assessment from us that they can use that's no stakes.
And I certainly respect that, and I don't want any undue stress on the educators, but I think we're overlooking the undue stress on the students. In the meantime, if we're putting them through, we're saying it's a pretest, but I know that I've got kids that go into that computer lab and take the assessment and end up in tears if they're not comfortable with the material or their performance on it. So I don't want to ignore what would necessarily be a negative outcome at that point also, especially setting up a new school year.
And letting students know that it doesn't have any bearing, there's no accountability for it when we give them. So it's simply,
And I think our older
simply is
students would
practice.
get that, but I think with our younger ones, we're setting a tone for
We would
the
have
school
to
year.
send
Whether
a-
we say it or not,
Have to
they're
send a
still
message.
feeling failure.
Sure. Well, I don't know that the rigor is definitely going to be increased. So we have to have a transition plan that we feel is going to provide that.
But
So,
legally, though, can we choose to drop Core Link and just, even if we meet extra as the assessment subcommittee after the April 28th adoption, putting something into place that more closely matches? On one hand, we're saying that we want to use this to, the slide said, get feedback regarding student learning, but then on the other hand, we're
So
hearing this is
Michelle, let
going to
me
be
ask this
pretest.
question. So I think this is where we might be headed. So we've already, I think it's probably a question for our vendor, maybe. So is it possible, because I still see we need to spread out the college and career ready more than just the spring, okay? So my question, Michelle, is if we have the college and career ready assessment, can we use that with some phases? Is that possible to be ready with one phase in the fall as opposed to using Core Link, which is really kind of do the same thing, but actually start the phase process earlier? Is that what you were getting at, Carrie? No?
I just continue to go back to, you know, if we're worried about like teacher stress level of tests, and we're going to take the core links, which is phase 1 and a version of a test, and then we're going to take the CCRT, which is another version of another test, but yet in 2015, I'm going to take a third version of a phased-in test, which we've never seen before, which I am accountable for, and my students are accountable for. I'd rather pilot the new test in 2015 and not take Core Link and spend my time in the classroom.
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes, Troy?
Will the college and career ready assessment test be ready by September of 2014? And let me lead
Are you
with
talking
that.
about the 10-item question?
I
or the
think,
10
and I
items?
concur that exposure,
Talking about our transition assessment.
because I think exposure to the students and the teachers is very, very important. But if we can't guarantee that that core, and I mean guarantee 100% that that core link is aligned to it, then it's a mistake, I think.
Yeah, again, our staff actually selects the items for it. So we would do an alignment right away after you approve the standards on the 28th to see whether or not we needed to change out any items. So it would be aligned.
The answer is yes.
Oh, yes,
That the
yes.
questions that we will be assessing over, if we use the core link bank of questions, is that it will be aligned with our standards. The college and career ready assessment sessions that we're going to give in the spring next year will also be aligned with our standards. In 2015-16, those college and career types of questions will also be aligned with our sessions. So they really won't be on any different content. We're like committed to that. We didn't want to, which is why you're getting this recommendation from us. We want to align them with our standards so that all of the college and career ready assessment sessions are aligned to the new standards, so that the 15-16 assessment, it may be different questions on this test, but it won't be different types or on different content. It will all be the same. Brad?
Again, I'm struggling with that because the motion that's on the floor right now is to move a test that's scheduled to be given in May to the fall. It is impossible that that can possibly have questions aligned to new standards that have not been adopted. We haven't even seen them. They're not even out yet. The draft's due out toward the end of this month. So that doesn't hold mustard. And I understand the need to give them practice, but what I'm wondering is why are we moving forward on assumptions from 2010, 2011 when we got into the waiver? Because clearly Core Links was added because we were on a trajectory to go to Park as the way we're going to comply with the waiver requirement to have data in the spring of 2015. So I get why Core Links is there. And I'm not saying it can't be repurposed. But that's a decision, I think, that needs to be reevaluated in the context of the larger statewide assessment system. And I'm wondering why, at this point, we wouldn't utilize the expertise of the board and the assessment subcommittee, think that through with the department, because I think Carrie's right. I think teachers are going to be concerned because I already saw, and I had another email just before I came from Liberty Perry, where the teachers were already getting ready to put in practice tests for the core links. Now, I don't know how you do practice tests for a 20-question exam, but they were already starting to schedule that in. So if we're going to be setting folks up for the next school year right now if we stay on the trajectory we're on for four statewide examinations. And by my count, I can't even find where the board's approved, but ISTEP and maybe in the future a pilot based on work the subcommittee hasn't done yet. But I don't even know where we've actually affirmed core links, because coming on as a new board member, I was surprised by the reaction of previous board members who didn't realize that we had negotiated core links in with the CTB McGraw-Hill contract. So I don't think I have that wrong, and I'll defer to other board members that have more history on this, but I think transitions is important. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just very concerned that somebody has to advocate for the students and the teachers and say, if you really play this out in your mind just from common sense, why wouldn't it make more sense for us to get a solid pilot test aligned to the new state standards, work out with USDOE how we resolve the need to give them data in 2015, because I understand that's a condition of the waiver, and then you're set up to give a full-scale assessment based on that same pilot, so everything's lined up the way it's supposed to be. And I know we'll still have to do ISTEP. I get that. We'll have to do it because of teacher effectiveness ratings. I don't like it, but I get it. But I think 2 tests are more reasonable than 4 exams, and trying to argue that it's a pre-screening, it just doesn't hold mustard, because all we're doing in this motion is moving it to the fall.
I just want to remind you that the folks in my office who work on the standards are the people who actually select the items. So I just want to make sure that's really clear to the board that these people are entrenched in these standards, so they know them inside and out, quite frankly. So I'm not concerned as the director of assessment that we would be able to produce a 10-item assessment in math and ELA at every grade level that would give people an opportunity to see what they're going to be held accountable for. I just want to make sure that's really clear, that that is doable. It would not be, there would be no concern on my part, at least, to get that done.
This issue has raised a number of questions. As usual, I was sort of checking off the items here, thinking this will be an easy item to get through. And thanks to my colleagues who have brought up issues that I have not thought about, I'm rethinking this. We do have an assessment subcommittee, and it may be useful, since the subcommittee, I believe, is meeting after this meeting, to table this issue and pass it on to them and have them come back at the next meeting with a recommendation, given all the variables that we've talked about. What would be the downside to tabling this motion and moving it to our assessment subcommittee?
If we
I think that's
do, do, then our next meeting is on the 28th. The I-STEP window is already open. The assessment window has already begun. I think that would be some really late notice to the schools regarding that core link.
Because right now, they're scheduled to give Core Link in May.
It seems like on this board, we get things really late. And when we want to take more time to discuss and reflect and maybe talk to colleagues and professional associations and our own colleagues, it seems like we always have to make a decision because something's coming up that is going to impact what we're doing. And it was, again, a hot day in Indianapolis when I first joined the board in July, and I had asked for an outline of what is coming up so we could look at an agenda of all the various items. And I know we're all busy, but if we were to receive some kind of an outline that really sets forth what we have to decide in the future, maybe we could avoid these situations where I feel now we have to vote on something that maybe needs more time for reflection. And so I'm just concerned about that as a procedural
Well,
item.
as with very important items, we get feedback from the field. And so what you're really seeing here is recent feedback from the field regarding this topic, and we're very sensitive to that. And so we have listened to that, we've had conversation about it, and this is the recommendation that we want to present to you, to actually phase in and transition to the college and career ready assessments.
I know there's a motion on the table right now, but my suggestion would simply be that we, at this meeting right now, simply vote no on a May administration of CoreLink, give the assessment subcommittee time to meet and determine what route we're going to take next in terms of assessment, and we can always have a meeting at a later time determining if and when it is given in the fall. For now, I think, from what I'm hearing at least, we all agree that this spring administration would not necessarily be an appropriate choice. I don't think we need to make a necessary decision right now on if and when it's given in the fall.
So the motion on the table currently is to move it from May to fall, and we have a second, and we've had discussion. So let's go ahead and, well, looks like I got one more hand up. Tony?
As for the motion, my vote would be to never administer CoreLink. Now, how we get to that procedurally, I don't know if we vote this down and then consider something else, but I don't think it should ever be administered. It's just too much and it's too fast. And it seems even a little unfair to the students, to me, to say that maybe at the end of this month, we're going to adopt new standards and then test them on the new standards in September. They've had, what, maybe 2 or 3 weeks of actual instruction time around the new standards by the time this school year ends and the time they test next September. I just don't think that's fair for us to put new standards in place at the end of their school year and then test them on them in September.
The purpose
So,
of...
well, I'm just saying, so I just, my general preference, though, would be to just not administer CoreLink at all.
The purpose of all the assessments is not really to test our students on the content. It is to give them exposure to the types of questions that they're going to see in 2015, with no strings attached really to teacher accountability, to accountability to the school grade, or any high stakes at all. So I just want to make that clear. Yes, Brad?
Madam Chairwoman, in light of the discussion, would you be willing to entertain withdrawing the motion, possibly, so we could talk about a motion to, as Sarah has suggested, and I think Tony's reinforced kind of what I'm hearing, that we basically halt the administration of CoreLinks in the May and then let the subcommittee look at this and think it through with the department so that the board has a chance to really appreciate that whole transition piece, because it is interrelated to the larger
decision when we get to a statewide assessment.
And I guess I might be okay with that as long as we're going to have a mechanism in place to come back, or at least have enough members here and others call in to make a decision, because we're going to have to give some direction to the field at some point. And I guess if we halt the May, then I guess maybe we don't need to do that then. I'm just thinking through
And I agree
the
with you. I'd
ramifications
like to-
if we need to come back and give some additional guidance to the field regarding it.
Probably so, and I'm wondering if as we do that work, if we start thinking about the pilot, if that wouldn't lend itself to do things that are more aligned to that standard that are related to that. I don't know, but I do agree with you. I think they need some practice, but it just seems like it would be more logical to withdraw the motion and then move to stop Core Link in May and then revisit that after the subcommittee starts working on this. Just a thought.
Can I, if we truly want to make this test informal, I appreciate the exposure as a teacher. I want to see what's there. But I want to make sure that it's what's going to be there in 2015, 16 when it's truly, truly important. Could we not create this Core Link test and just put it on the DOE website, like I go in now and pull up old ISTEP questions and from 11 and 12 and 12 and 13? Could we not just put a link on there to those questions and say, hey, this is as close as we can get right now?
So
I think we
well,
could put
and
it in
that's a
secure-
vendor question. So we've already purchased it. So I guess the question is, can we put it out there and let
And that's
schools do
truly
it if they
informal. And
want
if
to?
schools choose to use it, then that's their choice. And if teachers choose not to use it, that's their choice. That we're saying, we're not guaranteeing that, 'cause we haven't created a college and career ready assessment yet, so we can't guarantee that it's aligned to it. But this is as close as we can get right now, so if you would like to see what it's potentially going to look like,
Right.
here's what you can use. If you choose not to use it, then you have
I
an
was
option.
going to say, I think maybe you're going down the road of perhaps just saying it's optional. It would still be hosted by our vendor on a secure site, because those items are secure items.
We can't create that 20-question test and just put a link to that on the DOE site?
Yeah, I don't think we could do it probably fast enough, but we could make it optional. That might be one thing that the board would want to
So
consider.
optional, not in May, but optional in
I'm
next year.
sorry, optional in September, or anytime during the fall. I mean, it's really at the pleasure of the board. If you think we want to have that available for a long period of time and they can do a few items or one item a week, or, I mean, I think we can talk about a variety of ways that teachers might decide they want to use it and give them flexibility.
So I'm going to withdraw my motion, and the motion that I would replace it with would be that we let the field know that we will not be administering Indiana's College and Career Ready Assessment Phase 1 Core Link in May of this year, and that we will remand it to the assessment subcommittee to talk about the transition plan as we move forward. So with that, do I have a second? More discussion?
I'd just like to
Gordon?
say, I'm going to be supportive of this motion, but at the same time, also point out that I would have been supportive of the motion that was withdrawn, so.
Andrea?
I'm also supportive of the motion. I just want to raise one concern as I try to read the tea leaves here. My concern is that going forward, I hear a lot of signs that for our assessment to be deemed college and career ready by the federal authority, that assessment will have to be compatible with fully aligned Common Core assessments. And I want to make sure that we do not let assessment, the end product, drive these standards we're writing right now or the curriculum that will be developed out of those standards. I think it's extremely important that we figure out our standards and then our curriculum and worry about assessment at the end. And so I think that this, whatever the federal definition is of college and career ready, we need to be certain that it does not preclude us having Indiana standards that are not simply a rebranding of Common Core.
Andrea, I can assure you that our assessments will be aligned to our adopted standards, and they will be college and career ready. With that, we have a motion before us. If we would have roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas,
Yes.
Mr. Hendry,
Yes.
Ms. Neal,
Yes?
Mrs. O'Brien,
Yes.
Dr. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Watts,
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker,
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz.
Yes. Motion
Thank you.
carries. Thank you for the robust discussion, and I'm sure we will continue here later this afternoon. On to the next item. We have several discussion reports, but why don't we take a quick break? And why don't we take like a 10-minute break and come back? Let's regroup. Let's actually come back at 10 till 11. A quick recess.